I would be worried that with the ease of use for NPs and PAs and the prevalence of them in the medical field, somebody like myself could say, you know what? Why am I paying a doctor? Let's make easier access to PAs and the nurse practitioner. And then you start watering down medical practice. Maybe the doctor is a dying breed.
Since COVID, that kind of propelled or created a catalyst where now physician assistants and nurse practitioners are taking on bigger roles because it was needed, because we were short-staffed in the hospital, short-staffed in the clinics, and patients were getting sick, and we just needed more hands on deck. But then again, this is not to insult anyone, but when do we start reining that in, or when do we allow it to go too far?
Being at a law firm, what you get is something very similar where you have your partner or the owner of the firm or partners or your senior attorneys and your associate attorneys. And generally speaking, very similarly, you have these layers of you're just going to be drafting. I don't want you to see a courtroom. So you can set these rules as to what you can and cannot do on every single case. But to your point, the liability ends on the owner of the firm.
They still require supervising physicians. However, the benefit of being a PA is you can change specialties at any point in time. You can start as a family medicine PA this year, and then next year decide I want to do dermatology, and they can jump right into the field. And then they can go into nephrology the next year. There is no retraining. There is no going back to residency. Physicians are not allowed to do that. If we want to go from family medicine to pulmonology, I have to go back and reapply and go through residency all over again to make sure that I have met all the requirements to become a pulmonologist.
Medicine,
law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nick. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. I'm Lawyer Nick. I'm with Dr. Long, and today we have another live podcast. But if you haven't already, please go like, subscribe, comment. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, and all the social medias. We love engaging with you guys. So leave a comment on what you want to hear or engage. We really appreciate it. But Long, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's always good to do these in-person episodes together because I feel like we have the conversations flow a little bit more naturally. But of course, with me living in Wisconsin and you here in Texas, sometimes it's harder to make these happen. But we try to make the best of it when we can get together.
It's definitely different when we are talking in person as opposed to talking through a screen, because when we're talking through a screen, it's easy to get distracted by the screen. Here, we just get to do what we've always done, which is sit on a couch and have deep conversations. But for today's episode, I want to ask you about your feelings on the state of medicine, the state of doctors, the state of nurses, the state of medical practice, all the things that make medicine medicine, as well as give me the opportunity to talk about my current views on the state of law and the legal field and the judicial system and all the fun stuff.
You wanted to pick an easy topic today,
right? Well, these are the topics that when we started thinking about the podcast and we started coming to terms with how we were going to do it, these are the types of conversations you and I would have. We give a lot of benefit to our audience when we're talking about the details of law school or the details of medical school or passing your MCAT or how to be a doctor. But these were the late night conversations where we would debate and complain or praise. Now that we're in person, it's a great opportunity to go down that path and have a in-depth conversation.
And I also think we don't speak about it enough in public because we want to not think about those things because it is a more negative side of medicine, of law. And of course, we try to think, I personally try to go through life thinking of the most optimistic versions of everything. Definitely an important conversation to have. And hopefully our audience will find some important tidbits out of little bits and pieces of info that we give.
And we're big on talking about where medicine meets the law. We've talked about before in the past how medicine is impacted by law. Medicine is impacted by the statutes that are voted on, by what politicians are doing on Capitol Hill, and it just gets flowed down. Every single presidency, we have something different that comes out. We have some maybe Supreme Court ruling that then has a sweeping impact over medicine. That's a good place where we overlap. But at the same time, I think that as we're both licensed, you're practicing, I'm not, I'm doing something completely different. We see the field. My Instagram, my social media is filled with all these current lawyers talking about things. And sometimes I say, I completely agree with you. Other times I say, I don't know what you're doing. I have no clue why you're doing this or saying that. And I see a disagreement. Do you feel the same way when you're looking at your social media or you're looking at younger doctors coming up or older doctors going into retirement? How do you feel about it?
Landscape has definitely changed when it comes to the medical field. The way, even just from the last 5, 7 years since I've been in school, into residency, into now, it's changed
Mhm.
drastically. So I can only imagine another 5, 10 years how much more the landscape will change. Let's just dive right into it. I think the biggest thing that is changing right now is, as you said, legislators are allowing providers, as they term it, people who have a different education or even less amount of education compared to physicians, being able to come out and practice similar to physicians, but potentially not taking on the same liabilities. And so that's where some of the concerns, especially for patient safety, especially for mismanagement or poor outcomes, those are things that are still yet to be really fully diagnosed and researched and evaluated. And so only time will tell whether or not these new cohorts of providers are going to overall help the situation or make things worse. We have no idea yet. Of course, every society is going to try to support their own. So obviously their nurse practitioners, physician assistants are going to throw out research and data that shows how they are making a big change, and which they are. Like I said, there is definitely a place, a role, and they definitely fill a void that is much needed because there's just way too many patients for physicians to support. With that said, there's a lot that the government can do to help bring more physicians into the field. And right now, it's just being bottlenecked. There's just not enough residencies. We may have a ton of medical students wanting to be physicians and they graduate and become physicians, but then they're not able to take that next step into residency where they can be board certified and actually come out practicing.
Okay. Now, I am going to probably play the bad guy here, asking a lot of questions that
Yeah.
may insult our physician's assistants and may insult our nurse practitioners because I just don't know. So I'm going to ask Dr. Long. In the past, when I've gone to see the doctor, I'm usually only seeing a doctor. I've seen my family doctor. And it seemed like over the years, especially when COVID hit, when everything went virtual and the medical system was overwhelmed, things changed, at least from an outsider looking in, to where it was really hard to get in to see your doctor. Physician's assistants were available, nurse practitioners were available, and you were always given the option of, well, hey, you can wait however long to go see your doctor, or we have the PA sitting here who can take your call, or you can come in immediately and see them. And so from somebody seeking medical care, it's like a convenience or a need, a necessity in that moment, in that timeline of, do I need to go see somebody immediately? Because I don't want to wait if I can just be prescribed antibiotics. Give them to me now. I don't want to wait and the next week and be sick and have the flu and have the cold and have all these other ailments. So I'm looking for that quick and easy approach. But where did that come from? Like, where did the nurse practitioner and the physician's assistants element actually come from? Because back in the day, I felt like, you would have the nurse in the room with the doctor, and now it's the nurses coming in. And I don't even know sometimes if I should be calling them doctor, if they're a nurse, if they fail to introduce themselves the correct way, or if I don't ask the right question. I'm under the assumption I'm seeing a doctor, but
Mhm.
it may not be a doctor. So where did that evolve?
You're right. Nurse practitioners and physician assistants have been around for a very long time. They were supposed to be a support role for the physician, as you said, maybe not even be able to get into your actual family physician. So therefore, there was a second person that could catch some of those messages, prescribe what might be needed, doing simple tasks that were within their realm, within their scope. But since COVID, that propelled or created a catalyst where now physician assistants and nurse practitioners are taking on bigger roles because it was needed, because we were short staffed in the hospital, short staffed in the clinics, and patients were getting sick, and we just needed more hands on deck essentially. But then again, this is not to insult anyone, but when do we start reining that in, or when do we allow it to go too far? And that's where every patient is really important, that you get that education to find out who your actual physician, PA or NP are, and what their education route is, and whether or not it aligns with what your goals are. Because everyone brings to the table something different. There are really good physicians, there are really bad physicians, there are really bad nurse practitioners, good nurse practitioners, the same with PAs. And so it runs the gamut. At the end of the day, it really is who you connect with and who you will follow guidelines and follow medicine and listen to their advice. That's who I would recommend you go see. But at the end of the day, though, the issue that I'm seeing is that the physician was always meant to be that leader, the person to lead the medical team. But nowadays, with legislation, it's being changed. It's being moved. The physician now is being pushed down. Administrators are truly now the leaders, and they are designating, they're finding who is going to be the cheapest to hire so that they can bring more patients in. It's not about the best patient care. It's about how much money they can bring into the organizations. And it's truly unfortunate. And again, we eventually should go over the educational routes of a PA, NP, and MDDO, because it's really important that the public understands the difference.
That's similar to the law in the sense of having a paralegal. A paralegal goes through formal schooling to become a paralegal. And there's a good amount of times paralegals will actually continue on their educational journey at some point in life and become lawyers. But primarily what a paralegal is doing is they're learning the judicial system. They're learning how to draft. They're learning how to do pleadings. They're learning how to communicate appropriately in a legal atmosphere, legal environment. But there's a definite line of practicing law to where the lawyer or the associate or the partner overseeing that group of paralegals or that paralegal is ultimately responsible for the work product that gets put out. Even though a paralegal might be drafting something, the lawyer is still signing their name to it. And just from an outsider looking in from the medical system, there's more of a gray area in medicine. It's not necessarily as black and white as it is in law, to where when I had my issues with my hernia, I tried to go see my family practitioner. He wasn't available for like 3 weeks. So I went and saw the PA. The PA was a fantastic PA. He pressed on my stomach. He said, there's an issue here. I'm just going to immediately refer you out. And it was simple. He didn't overstep anything. He was very communicative. He was very helpful. And then I was able to see the specialist who guided me through the rest of that process. But I could see a realm where being alone in the room with the PA, he could have taken a different approach where he was a lot more, and I don't mean this in a negative connotation, but a lot more invasive, a lot more eager to try to solve my issues, to where his response may not have been, let's just refer you out to a specialist. His response could have been, well, I'm going to put you on a path to treatment, and this is what I'm going to do, and act more so of what a family practitioner or a specialist would have done. And I wouldn't have known any better.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's where we need more data and research to help prove one way or the other. Right now, the data and research that PAs and NPs use to show that they are equal to physicians, a lot will say that, a lot of the societies will say that they are able to give the same sort of care, is a little skewed because right now, majority of states do not allow them to practice independently. There's always a supervising physician. So we could never truly know if on their own they would be able to do the same thing. This would be the perfect time to go through the educational routes of each profession. So an MDDO has to go through 4 years of undergrad. They have to do a bachelor's and complete a good chunk of science, basic science courses. They then get into medical school, do 4 years of that, 2 years bookwork, 2 years rotations, where they're going through every single basic rotation, which is going to be like your specialties, your pediatrics, your surgery, emergency medicine, things like that. And then you have to finally decide which residency you go to. And depending on which specialty you get into, that's what you're going to do between 3 to 5, even sometimes 7 if you do additional 1 or 2 years of fellowship. That is the length and time of just being like a basic MD-DO, minimum of 11 years, but usually 13, 14, 15 years. Physician assistant is usually done by doing it 4 years, bachelor's, doing reg requirements. They get into PA school and then they do 2 years, 2 years or 1.5 years of bookwork, and then they do 1 to 1.5 years of rotations, similarly to physicians, but truncated. And then once they're done with those 3 to 4 years, they're out, and then they can start practicing essentially. But the issue with physician assistants is they right now don't have any sort of independence anywhere in the country. They still require supervising physicians. However, the benefit of being a PA is you can change specialties at any point in time. You can start as a family medicine PA this year, and then next year decide I want to do dermatology, and they can jump right into the field. And then they can go into nephrology the next year. There is no retraining. There is no going back to residency. Physicians are not allowed to do that. If we want to go from family medicine to pulmonology, I have to go back and reapply and go through my residency all over again to make sure that I have met all the requirements to become a pulmonologist. It's much more difficult. And again, it's not to say one's right or one's wrong, but this is kind of traditionally how it's been. Now, nurse practitioners are a little harder to even distinguish the actual pathway because it's changing and it's being diluted so much. From my understanding, you either get an associate's or a bachelor's. You then go right into nursing school to get your bachelor's of nursing, usually BSN. That will take 2 to 4 years. And then from there, the old way is that you needed at least a couple of years of bedside experience, in person, hands on, you're touching the patient. But nowadays, the issue that we find is that a lot of nurses will go straight from nursing school, graduate, never touch a patient, go straight into an online, what we call diploma mill, or just an online school where they can get their NP degree. And the issue with the NP degrees is it's so variable. Some are brick and mortar, many are online, and the preceptors or the people that they're supposed to be rotating under to learn from are people that they have to personally find. So they could find a really good one, they could find multiple bad ones, and there is no requirement for them to actually touch the patient. They just have to be in the room. It is very surprising at how many NP students actually get rotations where they are literally just a shadow in the room, and they have to just log a certain amount of hours and be like, okay, I'm done for the day, done for the week, done for the rotation. And then again, difference in education and the number of hours. I believe the number of hours is about 800 to 1,000 patient-facing hours for nurse practitioners through their nurse practitioner schooling, as just getting through medical school is that already 800 to 1,000. And then once you get into residency, that's beyond. It's like 15,000 to 20,000 patient hours. So it's a big difference in education.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play the dumb person for our audience. When we're looking at nurses, like I understand the notion of a physician's assistant, but when we're looking at nurses, first, what is the difference between an RN and a nurse practitioner?
The RN is the degree that they have to get first.
Okay.
An RN is going to be, in cases, associates, BSN, MSN. So it's all these different types of nursing degrees, and it's just that umbrella term for nurses.
So
RNs.
when I'm in the hospital and in the emergency room, the nurses come in there, they should technically all be RNs to
Correct.
some extent. Okay.
Correct.
When you get the NP, when you become a nurse practitioner, what are the things that you are allowed to do? What kind of gates open up to the nurse practitioner world that you are now allowed to practice in?
So similarly to PAs, you can practice at anything you want as long as you can get someone to hire you. So when graduating as an NP, you can jump right into dermatology and do that for a year. And next year, go into orthopedics. And then the following year, go into nephrology. There is no retraining. There's no additional training. You're learning on the job. PAs and NPs are basically apprenticeships. You are supposed to be constantly learning as you see patients day to day. And of course, physicians are also learning day to day. But the way that physicians used to practice way back, I'm talking like 100 years ago, was an apprenticeship. And we found that it did not result in the best patient care. And that's why we now have all of these boards, these regulations, these stipulations that you have to complete 4 years of medical school, 3 to 4 years of residency, because then it gives the best patient care. And so that's the change that I'm seeing, is that we're moving back to the way it was, which is what physicians used to train, is that you would just follow someone for a couple of years and then there you were a doctor. You didn't have to go through all of these board exams. You didn't have to take all these tests and make sure that you hit all of these requirements.
That's very interesting. I'm going to take it another step further. When I think of generally, nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, and a doctor, you're going into see all three. You have an ailment. You're explaining what's going on. They're giving you their opinion and feedback as to what they think it is. Step one. Step two, there's the next steps into your care, whether it is going to be prescribing medication, whether it's going to be going to go see a specialist, maybe even surgery. So from that baseline, all three are allowed to prescribe medications?
Correct.
Okay. All three are allowed to give referrals, I assume. What about anything that has to do with cutting somebody open or doing a more invasive procedure? Where does that line come into play?
So yes, all three are allowed to, as long as they have the tools and experience to back it up. Physicians are ultimately liable. So the benefit of being an NP and a PA is if their supervising physician is not comfortable with that procedure, they are technically not allowed to do it because they are under the liability of their supervising physician. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if something happens, the patient is going to go for the one with the biggest pockets, which is going to be the supervising physician, whether the physician was there in the room or not, whether they were in the building or not. Doesn't matter. If their name is attached to the PA and the NP, they are going to ultimately get the...
We're suing everybody.
Yeah.
We're suing all y'all.
Correct.
Okay. So, and is that something that's established with the NP and the PAs beforehand? Like, is the physician having the meeting with their staff and saying, you are not allowed to do A, B, and C? if you need to do D, you need to come ask me. Are those checks and balances in place?
You would hope so, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But again, this is where it's really sketchy how the supervising or collaborating partnership is being built across the country is that there's minimal oversight. It's maybe reviewing 10 charts a month out of the hundreds of patients that everyone's seeing, and then hoping that the physician is actually going dot by dot, line by line, making sure that everything is appropriate. There's a lot of trust in that partnership, and sometimes it doesn't end the best. I've heard a lot of stories where a brand new physician comes out and someone else made a mistake, and they are now being the one being liable, and they are fighting for their life to keep their license in their practice.
I'll bring it back to the law and being at a law firm. What you get is something very similar where you have your partner or the owner of the firm or partners or your senior attorneys and your associate attorneys. And generally speaking, very similarly, you have these layers of, okay, for right now, you're just going to be drafting. I don't want you to see a courtroom. Here, you are actually going to handle clients and client intake. But after that, you're not going to have client engagement. So you can set these rules as to what you can and cannot do on every single case. And you hope that your associate attorney or your junior associate or your paralegal follows those rules. But to your point, the liability ends on the owner of the firm. Now, granted, if you are an associate attorney and you step outside the box and step outside your realm, you could have other instances where maybe you'll be disbarred, maybe there's some disciplinary action, maybe you'll be fired, so on and so forth. But I see it in a very similar realm in law to where, depending on the hierarchy in that place of business, you are trying to make do and make sure that you're limiting liability, you're helping your clientele as much as possible. But the question that is going to come from this is, at most law firms, everybody has a different billable rate. If the paralegal is drafting something for you, that might be a third or half the billable rate of the associate attorney, who might be 2/3 of what the partner is. Money talks, and there's differences in who does what. If I go to my medical care provider and I do not see my doctor, I see a nurse practitioner, am I paying the same? Is it the same out-of-pocket expense? Or am I being billed for the same quality care that I'm getting from a nurse practitioner as I would be getting from my physician?
Correct. That's
Really?
So the insurance is going to be charging you similarly. However, they will reimburse it to the actual provider differently. So physicians will get 100% in reimbursement, whereas nurse practitioners and physician assistants will get maybe about 80%, 85% of what they're billing. However, what it gets billed to the actual patient is the bill, whether you're seeing physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner.
Wow, that is very eye-opening. Very eye-opening. Because I would assume that the standard of care I'm getting from my physician is going to be a lot better from my physician's assistant or my nurse practitioner.
Depends who you talk to. And again,
Okay,
if you speak
fair.
to a PA and NP, they're going to say that they give equal, same amount of care, same amount of knowledge. But again, it's up for debate, and that's where we need more data and research to really support that. There are a number of states that have independent practice now for nurse practitioners specifically. And so over the next 5 to 10 years, that will help open the gates for more data to support either or. Are they going to be able to only refer to other nurse practitioners? Then we can truly see, okay, if a physician never touches this patient, is that patient going to actually come out better, worse, or equally the same? Yes, the day-to-day medicine is easy. It's algorithmic, like cancer screening. We can go through cancer screening. I know you're 45. We're going to do colonoscopies then. I know you're 21. We're going to do starting your pap smears now. So those are easy, but it's those little nuances. And if you've never seen it before, if you're coming fresh out of school, whether that's PA school, NP school, and you've never seen a specific rash, you have no idea what you're doing. You're just going to be throwing random things at it. Whereas a physician, at least you went through a minimum of 2 months of dermatology rotations. And then we've gone through books and we've gone through the book work. And then you were practicing under another physician who's also seen multiple rashes. And so you're learning all these different nuances here and there. And at least, even though you may not know what it is, you know how to figure it out and treat it. The other argument is that at the end of the day, what is the administrator or the employer going to want to hire more? The one where it's a one-stop shop, the physician who's able to do everything? Or are they going to want to hire a NP or a PA who will require to order more labs, who will require to order more medications or refer out more? That just means more money for the actual hospital system, because now this patient that only had to see one person is now seeing 6 people. and having to come back multiple times to get labs, to get images. It's an interesting incentive for administrators and hospital systems. Unfortunately, we're seeing it kind of go that way. We see a lot of employers getting rid of 1 or 2 physicians and then hiring 3 to 6 PAs and NPs to replace them instead.
I appreciate you defending the PAs and the NPs in that. I put a lot of weight in practice and education experience. And maybe I should correct myself where if I'm going to go see somebody for medical help, I do want the most experienced. And I look at how hard it is for at least my own education. And I compare that to your education. And I say, okay, this person has been through residency, they've been through the ringer, they've gone through the appropriate channels of licensing, the appropriate channels of residency and interning and so on and so forth. And that's not to say that NPs and physicians assistants, PAs haven't done the same, because obviously they have had their own. But my initial thought is the doctor is more qualified. However, I'll play devil's advocate on myself. There's always that realm of, I remember being a baby lawyer and coming out and not really knowing what I'm doing. And I had to lean into our paralegal and office manager who had a lot more experience, even though I had the appropriate schooling. Being in aerospace and defense, obviously I worked with a lot of military. You have these instances in the military where you might have an individual go to West Point and come out and be a lieutenant, but they don't have the same experience as the enlisted soldier that's been in for a while who's had multiple tours. So there's this dynamic in this hierarchy of, okay, this person who's lower on the totem pole actually has more experience than the person by title who is higher. But at the same time, I now feel like I have to be concerned as to my PA. They might be experienced, but do they have that experience? Do they have the insight? And I guess maybe that builds into, if you're trusting your doctor, you also have to trust who they're putting into play. And there's maybe a comforting notion there. It's very interesting from that standpoint of you want things done, you want healthcare. Most people would agree with me. You want things done as cheap as possible. But at the same time, the fact that you're getting billed for the same thing across the board bugs me.
Yeah. That's a whole other issue with the insurance. That middleman is just always troublesome. But again, I want to pull it back and just remember that the way it used to be especially for NPs, is that you had to have 2 to 5 years of bedside experience before you could then jump into become an NP. And then those who went to a brick and mortar, like they're usually now at this point practicing for 15, 20 years, they are worth their weight in gold. And yes, they are probably more knowledgeable than a brand new physician coming out. However, the foundational knowledge is still very different. They didn't have to go through the exact same rigor of pathophysiology, pharmacology. Those are things that they were learning day to day on the job. Whereas we had to remember the molecules and the Krebs cycle and all these different things that there was a reason for it. And so the issue is nowadays, there's just so many online schools that are giving out degrees that it is hard. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if you're getting that really experienced at RN that went NP, or are we getting someone that has never touched a patient in their lives and coming out as an NP? And they're not going to tell you that. I mean, you have to know which schools are giving out those degrees to know what your candidate that you're interviewing for is.
A very interesting point is, being in the law and being lawyers, most legislators are lawyers. They understand the legal process. So lawyers are going to, by the very nature, protect the process of being a lawyer. I don't think you're going to see legislators pass laws to then allow other individuals to practice without a license. And that's because we want to make sure supply and demand is there and that we're protecting the integrity of the law. However, those people, as well as citizens and the people out in the world, they are now playing over your career. Lawyers and legislators and citizens are now voting on what doctors should do. I would be worried that with the ease of use for NPs and PAs and the prevalence of them in the medical field, somebody like myself could say, you know what? Why am I paying a doctor? Let's make easier access to PAs and the nurse practitioners. And then you start watering down medical practice. So where what we do now in 50, 60 years, maybe the doctor is a dying breed because all you need to do was get a nurse practitioner. All you need to do was get a physician's assistant. And so the companies that are trying to save a buck and the laws that get passed, hey, you can just be a PA. You get some experience under a doctor, and now you can go open up your own practice and you can do whatever you want. I think that's scary. I think the watering down of education and processes, it ebbs and flows, but it is scary to what our children's children might experience.
No, that's exactly what is happening. I mean, just within the NP education has changed, has watered down. PA education hasn't changed very much, but even physician education has not changed because we are not finding as much interest. People are not wanting to spend the 10 15 years wasting away their 20s and 30s only to come out to be equal to NPs and PAs and doing the exact same things when we have an exorbitant amount of student debt, when we could have just worked as an RN at the same time as going to NP school and coming out and doing the exact same thing as a physician. So it really de-incentivizes a lot of people to go towards that MDDO, and that's what we're struggling with. And this is kind of this moment in time, we're trying to decide, what is that pivot point? Do we pivot by leaning into that education and saying that, yes, the education is absolutely needed and we're going to stick to our guns and do that, or we're going to water down the medicine of physicians as well? Because there are some rotations, maybe it's not necessarily needed. I mean, we can probably cut medical school down to 3 years instead of 4, maybe cut down residency down to 2 instead of 3. There are areas that we can cut those things out, but then you're going to be churning out a different physician. Even nowadays, we feel like some physicians, they're just not created. I'm not created in the same way as my attendings who came out 20, 30 years ago. I mean, they had to work endless hours. They knew stress. I didn't know stress. And so those are things that build your character. They build the way you practice. They build your love for medicine and for your job. And so it's just interesting. But it's also interesting because our society has shifted. Our mindset is no longer about dedicating your entire life for your career. It's now finding that work-life balance. People are more willing to give up parts of their professions and their careers so that they can enjoy life more. So if it means I'm spending less money, less debt, less time at school so that I can still be a mediocre doctor or provider, maybe that's the way that the society's headed.
And even coming out of I should say, in corporate life, when we were hiring after COVID, things were different because the people that, like, we came together in college. Our college was a very social atmosphere. We had to be out into the world, out in the streets of Austin, figure out how to engage with people, figuring out how to talk to people, how to get through from a social aspect. It was odd, and nothing against the generation that had to go through COVID when going through their education. But the fact that everything went remote, I feel like there was a lot of societal aspects that just disappeared. The ability to talk to somebody in person, the ability to read social cues and read body language, things became awkward. Some of that is still instilled in the younger generation as they're coming up into the career, regardless of what it is. Because I could only imagine trying to do a whole entire education based on being remote. My brother actually started at the same company I was at during COVID, and his training was vastly different from my training because everything had to go through the computer. He had to try to reach out to people. He had to try to schedule video calls. And so when you're losing that maybe bedside manner, the societal aspects, it's different. And then at that point, maybe people don't see it as a necessity to build rapport, to have the conversation. Things might be a little bit more cold, or maybe so many people are just comfortable behind the monitor where I don't want to be in a regular medical practice. I want to do everything virtually and do all the telehealth stuff. COVID was just something that changed the landscape for a lot of different professions. I'm old school. I feel to the same extent, lawyers before me had it so much harder just by the simple fact that I could take tests on my computer was vastly different than what they had to do, where they had to write everything by pencil. And now it seems like even though the ease of use for education is there and the knowledge is there and the information is there at our fingertips to where you can be sitting in a room using an AI tool and have it funnel all the information to give you accurate assessments, it still waters down the experience.
So do you think, again, speaking to your friends, are they utilizing that, speaking to their clients more virtually, or has that died down since COVID? Because I know that when I met with our lawyer to get our real estate, our trust and everything set up, half of it was done virtually, even though I felt like it could have been done in person. I imagine that 10, 15 years ago, everything would have been done in person.
During my legal practice, and it was only 3 years, about a decade ago, it was very in person. It was very, hey, show up. We need you to bring everything here. Now, as I went through corporate, and now that I'm out on my own, I'm still doing negotiations, still doing contractual stuff. I'm still doing things with the law school. Things are a lot more virtual. When I'm talking to students, we have Zoom calls set up. I would say half our sessions are via Zoom and the other half are in person, because there are things that we can do via Zoom where now we're being efficient on time. Same thing with contractual documents. I don't need you to come into the office and sign things. We're using software and programs that vet every ounce of that signature to where, yeah, just sign it virtually and send it back my way. And so the ease of use is there. People rely on that. There's still, throughout the United States, there are still jurisdictions and there are still courts that will do things virtually if they can. It's not that hard to hop on a Zoom call and have a trial. That was actually going on during COVID to make sure that the court systems were keeping up their backlog. So when you're finding things at work, you don't want to get rid of them. But again, how far down the rabbit hole do you go? How far down is it until there is a problem and you have to reverse? I mean, I saw it at my job before I left. Well, all of us were remote. And at one point they said, this isn't working out. We need to do a return to office. So they're doing 5 years of sweeping change to bring everybody back in, because at that point they think a change needs to be made. And then there's pushback, and the people that have gotten used to that lifestyle don't want to do it.
So a similar question to what you had to me is pay. Do you think that the pay has changed or has stayed similar because we've gone more virtual? I'm trying to remember if talking to my state lawyer, whether or not it was just a big fee that covers everything, whether we spent 2 hours or 15 hours. Like, do you feel like that landscape has changed because virtual makes it more simple, so therefore you're spending less hours and therefore you're billing for less? Or do you think where do you think that has changed?
Rate of pay has just increased, with inflation, with everything else. You're getting paid more for what you're doing. First year associates that are coming out are getting paid vastly different, vastly more money than what I was getting paid at.
Must be nice.
Right? But what you're getting billed for changes. So for instance, back in the day, and even today, if we had to drive to a hearing that was 2 hours away, then we would bill out for that drive time.
Right.
Well, if I no longer have to drive to that hearing or drive to that mediation, we do it virtual, that's saving you 2 hours of billables that now you just jump on a Zoom call and there's nothing else. It comes to the point of you're minimizing the overhead. And so you can find the other areas where maybe you can cut costs, or maybe your billable rate doesn't have to be as large. But at the same time, you're gonna bill what people are willing to pay. But to that point, it just slims down the process. If I don't have to sit there and scan 10,000 documents over 5 hours and bill you for it because you just have a PDF and you give me a little flash drive and it's there, wonderful. Like, that saves you money. But yeah, the billable rate, it stays the same, but the billable charging is different.
Do you feel like there's any other big changes within the legal fields over the last couple of years that have been noticeable?
The biggest change that I've seen, it's the approach, and we somehow, in a lot of podcasts always come back to this, but it's the AI approach. The legal field is now heavily focused on AI, to where there's been this whole new category of practice, which is artificial intelligence. How to deal with artificial intelligence, the pros and cons, the legalities of it. Lawyers are now trying to find ways to use AI. But other than that, outside of remote stuff and virtual stuff and AI and just technology in general, lawyers are still learning, right? The process has not changed. You're still going through three years of school. I would say for the most part, school is not remote. There's no online degrees. At least I haven't heard of any law schools that are doing online degrees. I've heard of classes that will do classes remotely because they can, but the training's still the same. And when you get out, you're still going to a firm. You're still practicing law. You're still trying to figure out, as a baby lawyer, how you're going to become an associate or a partner. Like, not a lot of changes. I would say that you guys probably experience more change than we do. And again, you have the lawyers, the legislators protecting the tradition and protecting the requirements of what it is to be a lawyer.
You brought up AI, and it just makes me think of the changes we're seeing in medicine with AI. We're utilizing it a lot more. And just within the last year, I remember last year when they rolled out AI in our health system, they were like, oh yeah, it's HIPAA compliant. We've talked to our legal counsel. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to add anything extra. We just have to let the patients know that they're going to be recorded and that we're using it. And then turn this year, a year later, apparently there are now a couple of new lawsuits on the East Coast, which has then caused this ripple effect to where we are now going back to the drawing board and just like over documenting and just making sure we're asking the patient at the front desk, the nurse rooming the patient has to
Mhm.
ask, and then the physician also has to ask the patient if it's okay to use. And then we also have to put a single statement in the actual note. We should do, an episode specifically looking at those AI cases and see where the legalities or what's going on with it to see how it's changing the landscape. Because I have no idea what the lawsuits are, but I find it interesting to figure out what they're suing for and how the
Mhm.
patients are trying to get money out of the AI system.
That's very interesting. And again, it goes to the point of, you had mentioned it, you had legal counsel that had to look over all the AI dynamics of it. And when you look at just information data in general, whenever we log into a website, whenever we're signing up for a rewards card, we're giving our data. The value is in the data and the ability to sell that data. So when you're looking at maybe something being HIPAA compliant, well, where is that data going? You're funneling a bunch of information into a system. Like, how valuable would it be for a pharmaceutical company to have access to all of your notes and all your data on every single one of your patients in a certain region? That information is so valuable.
Mhm.
What they could do with that information could make them so much money. So where are the safeguards? When does that kick in to protect you as a doctor, protect your medical system, to protect your patients? That's very interesting. I think you're right on point. Like, that would be a fun podcast to go in and actually look at the cases and me go through why. Because in law, we're always trying to use analogies. We're always trying to find a similar comparison. Well, this should be this way because 10 years, 15 years ago, this was this way. And here's how this matches this and this matches that. That is something that it would be just be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But we talked about lawyer pay rates. When I am a student and I am trying to decide, I want to go into medicine, do I be a physician, a PA, an NP? What's the difference in pay for all those? Is it still just as valuable to go become a doctor because of when you get through the rigmarole of residency and med school, you're going to get paid as much as you are? Or is it, hey, I should just go be a PA because I'm going to get paid nearly as much and the education isn't as...
It depends on specialty. You'd be surprised by this, but there are several physician assistants and nurse practitioners out there who actually make more than physicians because of
Really?
their specific specialties. Yeah.
Wow.
Remember, we talked about how family physicians and pediatricians are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of income. And you can, look at our episode where we do go over the different income ranges for different specialties. But there are specific specialties that NPs and PAs can go into that actually make more than that. And so sometimes it's not lucrative to become a physician. You really have to weigh the benefits and the risks and the burden, the stressors of the debt, the time that you're committing to it, and whether or not it's going to be something that you can do for your career, for your lifetime.
All right. So I have another question for you. I'm going to get creative with this. Could, as a doctor, as an MD, as a DO, could I renounce my title and move into the PA world in order to then not be so restricted by the requirements for change? Like, could I sit back and say, I'm no longer a doctor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go be a PA. And now that I'm a PA, I could switch through whatever specialty I want. I don't have to re-enroll. I don't have to go through another residency. I'm just going to go to do this. And because I'll be good at it, because I'm a doctor, I will then make more money than I would have made over here. Is that a possibility?
Unfortunately not. This is actually something that a lot of physicians have thought about and asked. And unfortunately, we can't unknow what we know. If I go into this other field, they're always going to utilize my top degree, which is a physician, and say that, hey, you had the knowledge to back this. You made a mistake. We're going to see you as a physician, not a PA. But believe it or not, NPs are treated differently. They can go back to the bedside and work our nursing jobs, and the liability is different. They don't worry about any of that because as an NP, they are under the purview of the nursing board still. They're not under the medicine board. And so there's a difference in that. You actually see a lot of NPs who come out not be able to find a job because job market has been inundated with them. And so it's harder to find the types of jobs they want to find. And so a lot of them do go back to the bedside and they're able to. And so, yes, that's another thing to take into account when you're deciding, do you want to be a PA, NP, or physician?
That's very, very, very interesting, especially from the law. I could essentially choose not to pay my dues and go into a state where I am no longer licensed, or I'm licensed, not practicing. And I can go off and not be held to the standard. Hey, I have my JD and that's that. Now, granted, I can't go practice law without a license because, again, that black and white rule. But I can go off in the world and do JD things and have that title. So it's very just nuanced with medicine, and that pains me because I am very big on, if you've done the work to get that experience, you should be getting paid for it. But at the same time, capitalist, like, if you can swing it, especially if you're in a different area of the country or what have you, go get paid. Do you feel like, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, do you feel like overall your experiences with PAs and NPs have been more positive, more negative? I'm sure you work with some of the smartest people out there, but how do you feel about the process personally, and who you've worked with and what you've seen?
It's a mixed bag.
Yep.
I've come across a lot of overzealous NPs and PAs who are new, but they think that they know everything, and it's concerning. But then you meet the ones that have been out for a decade and 15, 20 years, and I learn a lot from them. And I ask them questions, they ask me questions, and it's very collegial. So it really depends on the person. Like I said, there are good doctors and bad doctors. There's good NPs, bad NPs, and good PAs and bad PAs. It really depends on who you're working with, if they're open to conversation, if they're open to learning and bettering themselves for the patient. And that's all that one can ask for when you're looking for a provider.
And I guess they also have to be open to the feedback. Like, they have to be able to take the feedback. Because I would assume, just like in any workplace, if you're overseeing your team, if your MP or your PA can't take feedback, you're probably going to get rid of them. Are you the decision maker in that process, though?
No, unless you own your own private practice.
Okay.
The administrators are the ones that are making that decision. If they hire someone and you guys don't get along, at the end of the day, the administrator will decide who's worth keeping and who's not worth keeping.
And you've mentioned this in the previous podcast, but administrators are, just as far as medicine go, more so lay people, like just business degrees, business background.
Usually not physicians. It's very rare to find a physician administrator unless it's a physician-led system, which is hard to find these days.
So you might have somebody who has just been heading up companies, doing administration stuff or whatever, may not have a lot of medical experience, come in, look at the accounting, look at the payroll, and say, no, we're going to keep them because it makes sense financially.
You got it.
So another little nugget of craziness.
Yeah, a lot of behind the scenes stuff in medicine and in law. This is a great place to end the conversation, because we could go on and on and on and on about this stuff. But I want to just make sure that we end on a good note, that, again, this is all about transparency, just making sure that our audience understands the differences between paralegal, lawyer, NPPAs, all the different educational routes. And it's not to sit here and bash and put down any particular role or career choice. It's just making sure that if you choose one of these roles or these journeys, that you do it for the right reasons and it's going to fit your lifestyle. Everyone has a role in medicine. We have plenty of patients to go around. So again, this is the Medical Legal Brief here with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nick. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, please just make sure you subscribe and follow and comment on our content. We are on Spotify and YouTube, and we post on Wednesdays Central Time at 10 a.m. So make sure to check out our next episode.
Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.